You're nothing without your partners. It's the same thing with acting. You're only good as your scene partner.
Ghost Cult Magazine welcomes in the great Alec, head of Ghostbound. How are you doing, my friend? How are you doing today?
I'm very well, thank you. Thank you for having me.
Thanks for being here. Congratulations. We are on the eve of your EP release. This will air probably much later, but so great to catch you right when this is dropping.
Mhm.
It was a very productive time for you, apparently, so far in the lockdown era, we'll call it.
In a manner of speaking, it seemed like it was like everything and nothing going on. Just sort of like because it was like months and months of activity and then months and months of absolutely nothing. Because the majority of the EP was recorded prior to lockdown, literally weeks before lockdown. We, I think, just finished up all of the basic tracking for guitars and bass and everything of that nature. And then I think I went in to track vocals, I think in August of 2020 when the numbers were slightly down in NYC, and I was able to kind of seize the opportunity to go in with our engineer and just hammer out the entire EP in a day because who knows when we were going to be able to come back. But yeah, then in the midst of all of that, I was sort of like teaching myself basic home recording techniques and learning how to cook different meals and baking sourdough bread like everyone else seemed to do. Cultivating a starter, I was able to do that.
And, amazing. We'll have to get that recipe.
Happily.
I think it's sourdough bread on the coasts and banana bread down south. That's what I was told.
Is that true? I'm from the other coast. I'm actually from California, and it was like weird for me when I first moved to New York City, how I couldn't find sourdough bread anywhere. Like other than supermarkets, like no restaurants had it whatsoever. But I was thinking to myself, I thought this was bread. I thought this is literally what ancient grain is that's how they made it. And but seems like enough people in lockdown have taken up that hobby so that there's enough sourdough bread to go around.
Nice. The only sourdough bread that I know of that's like native to New York is a bialy, if you know what that is.
Yeah.
Not everybody knows what a bialy is nationwide, so we're gonna educate people. It's like an English muffin, but it's sourdough bread, and you don't necessarily have to even cut it to enjoy it. You could just eat it the way it is.
There's onion in that too, right?
It's like onions
with like kind of it's a very nice dish, the bialy.
Yeah, it's very native to New York, I think, like Grand Street, Lower East Side.
There's that famous place on Houston, known for its knishes and bialys. I'm not sure if it's still there.
I hope so.
It was right next to Landmark, or the movie theater that's no longer there.
I just heard the Pyramid Club is closing, which is like a huge part of my youth. And my bands played there. They used to have metal bands and punk and industrial bands play there. I saw a lot. Very weird, very goth place. I was not a goth, but I would interested in goth people and goth culture. So haunt the goth bar. And even as recently as like a year ago, I was there hanging out. So like, it's so crazy to me that they're going to be gone from the landscape.
It's so funny to me because I worked on 12th and Avenue A for a solid 5 years, and I walked by there constantly. But I always told myself I'll go in there one day. And, of course I never did. And I'm obviously aware of its standing as a venue. All the venues are closing, all the venues are closing. But I do think, luckily, St. Vitus is weathering the storm, as evidenced by your hat.
I support it with my hat.
Of course, I should have worn my T-shirt. Like luckily Vitus is still going strong, and I would hazard a guess that once the world reopens, we'll see a whole influx of new places to play. Because at the moment it's just Vitus and seemingly Lucky 13, and I don't know if the Kingsland is still open. I have no idea. But
I believe Kingsland will stay open. They had a second place about to open. And I think that's still happening. And a couple of other, there's a really cool movement on called Revive the Scene that's doing these live stream events, you know, at Bowery Electric and other places. Mm-hmm. Bowery Electric is probably not going anywhere. So, although that's just for certain, you know, types of bands. But yeah, I would hope, just like the last time, you know, in the 90s, you know, Giuliani time in the 90s, and I say that with all disdain and no praise for that guy. But there was like a mass closures of venues, and places were going under, and it was not a friendly place for live music at all in New York, not just metal and rock. And then a new era sprung up in the last 15 years where we have all these other places. So I hope it stays alive nationwide. It's a concern for me.
And moreover, I also think I would hope that we would also get a completely huge influx of like angrier, stranger underground music. Because usually isolation is exactly what is the kind of thing that breeds, right?
Right.
So I don't know, maybe we'll be the new Norway circa 1992 or what have you.
I would hope so.
Minus only with less Hitler.
Please, no Hitler. No Nazi punks, fuck off. But I had said like, oh, maybe we're gonna come through this terrible emotional, political, and you know, global neurosis time where we're gonna come through like a Reagan 80s, where we're gonna come through with this incredible post-punk and pop music that was even great, which some of it is even now, and so punk rock and thrash metal and death metal and black metal and all these interesting scenes. And I haven't quite seen it yet, but it's only been a year. Well, we had 4 years of Trump, but we've only had like a year of the plague. So
right, and I think I'm forgot where I was going with this, but basically it's like I think the way scenes form is a little different now, obviously, because now we have the internet. So we have kind of micro and macro scenes popping up and little communities popping up amongst people who have never met. Largely just people who are who make, I guess in our case, like weird atmospheric avant-garde metal stuff that isn't easily categorizable, and you know, we kind of all kind of talk on Facebook Messenger and things like that. So really it's kind of a global scene with the kind of little mini scenes sprouting up here and there. I'm not really one for like local scenes, only because I prefer to stay home for the most part. And a lot of the time, this will sound whingy and disrespectful. I certainly don't mean it to be, but a lot of the times there's a specific image that we associate with a local band, right? And it's usually something that we find on that Rigs of Dad makes fun of on Instagram. And people assume that simply because one lives in New York City, right, that every band has this kind of global metropolitan appeal. But New York City is just like any other small town in the respect that there is a local scene, and there is a rather large amount of bands where it's kind of made up of people who, you know, haven't bought a record since 1995 or are very much stuck in kind of the local, you know, support your local scene, man. And I'm like, dude, like supporting your local scene is what keeps scenes local. You kind of want your bands to be successful. I'm not saying, you know, always support local businesses, but there was a point in time, especially when I was playing in Cosmodemonic, when we were kind of shoehorned into these weird bills where we were completely just kind of room meat, like padding for these bills because they needed a headliner for whatever reason, or they just needed an extra band just to kind of fill it out. And we're looking at each other going, why are we here? Like this doesn't benefit us whatsoever to play this gig. I just tossed my dog's toy over there. And you know, I don't mean to whinge or needlessly knock any other band, but yeah, it was. I started to feel that way when Ghostbound started to play live too, where suddenly I'm like, I was reminded of how much I hate 5 and 6 band bills. And I'm just like, when we get back to normal, I don't want to see any more than 3 bands on a bill.
Like, I agree.
Like it's just so 2, it would be great, but it's wishful thinking. 3 bands on a bill, 4 if it starts early. But I mean, yeah, anyway, I was kind of yammering a bit there.
No, it's good. This geopolitical conversation is brought to you by Alec and Keith.
Right.
And also thoughts on the music scene in New York and elsewhere. But no, it's all good, man. I love hearing from you, and I could do this all day. But of course, I want to discuss this EP. So many layers. It's publicity has a job, right, to promote your record, and your team's has, biased or not, your team has done a great job with you historically. But I've been very pleased with how it's interesting that a lot of bands get this, what's convenient for journalists like myself is like, oh, here's for fans of FFO, right? You see it in a lot of press releases. Right. And yours don't generally have that, not because there are no comparables, but because you're very unique, because you have your own unique style, songcraft. I think it's cool to point out influences, but never say you sound like this, because it would be unfair to you. And I think it doesn't do justice to what you hear. I think you have one of these musical projects. You really have to listen to it to understand it. You can say, like, you can name drop influences. I was writing something and I was like, oh, if early Killing Joke, jazz fronted Cynic, or Stephen Wilson, or Opeth Unplugged, or Storm Corrosion. Mm-hmm. So I like any of those things wouldn't be inaccurate, but they wouldn't tell the whole story. That would be fair to you.
I think you can also stretch that out to include many other bands that possibly do straddle a more obvious line. It's just that I think those bands are more comfortable with being categorized. Have always kind of existed outside of that with most of the things I do, specifically musically. And when it comes to Ghostbound, I feel like it's very much a representation of who I am as a human being. I feel like it's, for lack of a better term, a very personal project, because it's all a product of all of the myriad of things that I'm interested in. And I happen to have a wide frame of reference. I spent time as a music journalist early on. I amassed quite a few contacts. I'm obsessive about music. I'm obsessive about film. I'm obsessive about books and reading. I have this kind of almost bulimic way of like processing and fostering my passions, which have always throughout my entire life have dealt in some form with music, film, or theater, or literature, or what have you. And my ultimate goal with Ghostbound from day one has been that it has to be this holistic style of music, that I would never be comfortable just being one thing or the other. I would like to be all things in some form, whatever that may mean. And as the case may be, yes, well, Ghostbound may sometimes be a metal band. I wouldn't say that we're exclusively a metal band in any way, any more than we're exclusively a rock band or a post-punk band or avant, whatever you want to call it. And I think it just goes to show, just like the comparisons that we've received have been kind of all over the map, where people kind of some reviewers will sometimes lean heavy into the metal direction. Well, they'll hear a lot of Maiden in our sound, which I don't hear personally, but if they want to point it out, that who am I to say that they're wrong?
There are worse insults to be thrown at you than say you sound like Iron Maiden.
Seriously. It's like, well, and I'd be lying if I said I didn't love Maiden, but I would also be lying if I described them as an inspiration to me. Right. That's harsh. I meant influence.
Yeah, no, they're not. Everybody loves Iron Maiden, but not every band can sound like Iron Maiden, or does draw influence in their songwriting from Iron Maiden.
I mean, enjoying music and taking influence from often at odds with one another. And I just have this great love of being at a point where people can listen to our music and not know how to describe it adequately. And so far, the best descriptive I have found is from Dean Rispler, who described us as blackened torch songs.
Yes, I love
which I think Dean is my favorite human being, but I feel that that's the most accurate way that people have described us so far. I used to have a dumb tagline for us where I described us as like Crowded House as a black metal band.
Yes.
But I thought I meant that more as a joke, and that kind of thing is very prosaic. Where I'd
maybe Crowded House covering Alcest.
Yeah, I can hear
like
that.
Atmo Black, Crowded House. Don't Dream It's Over.
Crowded House with heavy guitars, like, because I would often joke, because like one of my favorite records ever is This Is the Sea by the Waterboys. And I have a friend who's a music manager. Like he manages the Apples and Stereo and a couple other bands, and I asked him if he could somehow get me in contact with Mike Scott, because I wanted to send him a copy of All Its Phantom. And I was like, basically that entire record is This Is the Sea with heavy guitars. So I just wanted to get that his way. It didn't end up happening, but one day perhaps. I suppose we fit somewhat under the atmospheric metal / black gaze / whatever you want to call it milieu. But even then, I hear certain bands and I don't always hear that myself. So I love being any and all things or nothing at all.
There you go. Why limit yourself?
And that's the ultimate thing. Is it's my example of music without limitation. Everything is okay in the world of Ghostbound.
Let's talk about the step laterally. I don't necessarily want to talk in terms of, obviously it's a step forward, but I think it's like a very interesting side step from All Is Phantom, which was a lot of people loved, I loved. And it was a few years ago, and it was sort of a process for you to even get there. And it's now going on through almost 2.5, 3 years. And now we have this, amazing, different EP, which, is its own thing.
Right. Well, thank you. That's very nice of you to say. It's weird because like my relationship to All Is Phantom is sort of like, that was sort of my life's work. I had so many years to get to that point. Right. And then when it was released, it kind of it never performed in the way that I wanted to or anticipated. I was very naive about it. I was very, not so much delusional, but I had a feeling that as long as I was signed to a label of any kind, that it would take flight, and not kind of realizing the amount of work that I would have to put in to promote it. And when it became apparent that our now former label wasn't really pulling its weight, I kind of did everything I could to sort of kind of get it out of the nest just a bit. It still didn't perform in the way I wanted it to, even though I remain convinced that I'm able to sleep at night knowing that I made the record of my dreams, right? So that's, I wrestle with that constantly, and I wrestle with that with the new EP as well. Like it's the same. I guess it's why we keep doing it, is because that anxiety that occasionally you feel that it's not good enough, or that you didn't, that maybe I was wrong to think that this was as strong of a thing to release as I originally thought. Those emotions are very real, and I think anybody who is a performing musician, or anybody who deals in the performative arts of any kind of deals with that sort of ebb and flow. At the moment, I'm very proud of it. When I listen to it, I can objectively say that I was like, I can see why people would like this, not free of ego. I can listen to it and be impressed with it as a listener. And I'm able to do the same with All Is Phantom. And I'm very pleased with that. I feel like that's a step towards a legacy, But to go back and to answer your question in regards to the journey that sort of went there, a lot of the songs that make up Extended Play for My Sweet Merry Time were in fact from that same 10 to 15 year period that sort of comprised All Is Phantom. It's just that for whatever reason, a lot of the songs I felt were either too samey or perhaps too simple, or in some way just didn't fit the overall flow of All Is Phantom. So, but I kept returning to them. For some reason, they stuck with me. And before too long, after All Is Phantom was released, I started to kind of unearth them and take them to my bandmates. And I was like, what do we think of this? I have these 4 or 5 songs kicking around that I've been working on for the same amount of time. I sort of had this idea that I want to release them as sort of a singular experience, like a suite of music. And consequently, most of the songs in question were all in 6/8, which to me is a very oceanic wave-like time signature. I'm a huge fan of records that deal ostensibly with the ocean. I grew up on the Central Coast of California. The most gorgeous beaches ever were there, and always was fascinated by the ocean. I didn't spend a lot of time in it, but I loved. One of my favorite things to do would be to walk in my hometown with my headphones in, just walking along Scenic Drive in Carmel, just kind of witnessing this kind of expanse out there. And it was something I quite wanted to capture musically. And I realized that like a lot of these songs sort of lent themselves rather easily to this concept, this idea. And so then we just kind of got to work. We spent a lot of time in pre-production, which normally I was such a Luddite with All Is Phantom. I would just kind of record a series of riffs into my phone and then present them to our then session drummer, now current drummer, and our bassist. And I would just sort of say, okay, so this happens X amount of times, and we'd sort of work out the songs that way. But this time I went in with like a basic structure, and then we all as a band kind of arranged around it. So we ended up there was we were working on string arrangements for the opening song, the one that we just premiered a video for, and We Are Already at Sea. And it was basically just 3 guys with very little knowledge of how to play piano or keyboards of any kind, just with one finger like around a keyboard, just huddling, going, okay, no, it should ascend like right here. And we ended up sort of arranging and orchestrating the entire EP just around Talha, our other guitarist's laptop. And we would put like placeholder drums. I would record demo vocals over it. So by the time we got into the studio, we were 100% prepared in every way, shape, and form. We essentially just kind of rebuilt the demos, and it was a lot more workmanlike. It was a lot easier. There was pretty much no stress involved in the recording because everything was done ahead of time. I think the only thing that really kind of presented a challenge was the sound design, the in-between atmospherics, because I did want everything to kind of segue into each other. A lot of that was done by Talha, our other guitar player, who kind of sat with the material and chose some synth sounds. And we had recorded like something like 30 or 40 minutes of random weird guitar noise together, where it was just myself with a guitar and my entire spaceship of a pedal board, just turning them all on at once. And I would play something, and then both Talha, Noah, our bassist, and Nolan Voss, our engineer from Anacon and Pyrolatris and Trench Grinder and what have you, they were just kind of on the floor twiddling knobs, and we were just kind of manipulating sounds. And that's that became sort of the bedrock of a lot of the atmospheric elements that you hear on the EP. I view the EP ultimately as sort of an expansion pack to All Is Phantom, to use a nerd gamer term.
I love it.
Yeah. Because it was sort of like a way to say goodbye to this style, I suppose, the kind of more, I guess the friendlier side of Ghostbound, which is kind of more or less more accessible than not. They are, at the end of the day, these songs are in a major key. They're more or less pop songs. Like if we get down to it, if we strip away all the heavy guitars and all the synth orchestration, you basically just have me and an acoustic guitar, just kind of, and that stems a lot from my love for 80s pop music, big 80s big music, as it were, like Big Country, the Waterboys, and Talk Talk, specifically the latter 2 Talk Talk records. I don't know, just kind of exhausting the material that I had sitting around so that I could finally move on to something new, to something that's kind of more indicative of myself, where I am emotionally now, and where I am, or where society is. I have this idea in mind that we're just going to get darker and more angular as we go. Timing always works. Timing is always weird, because I expected us to still be in the Trump shit show. I like I was cynical to the point of like, there's no way we're not going to get another 4 years of Trump. That's just and I was like, so you all better sharpen your knives and start making some dark music, because we need a way to cope with this. But sure enough, things are kind of slowly on the up and up, even though they're still kind of fucked in many other ways. So I don't know how that will work out. I might change my tune. Nothing ever goes to plan. I just see the newer riffs that we're writing, the newer riffs that we're presenting, seems to be a bit more on the angular, menacing side of things, which I'd like to explore further.
Nice. I love that you discussed how, obviously the first record was a culmination of many years and like a very auteur theory type of experience for you. You brought in collaborators after you had things envisioned. And this time I know you took steps to really involve a band this time. You have a band now. It's not just Alec
Yes.
and your vision.
No, it's not the Alec show.
I wanted you to talk a little bit about that, like letting go. It has to be scary a little bit and a little out of your comfort zone when you're so used to kind of, this is how I see things.
Now, no, because I'm old enough now to not, I'm not Billy Corgan, it's like I started this when I was significantly older than if I were in my late teens or my early 20s. And, I had lots of time to grow as a human being and to know how to be in a band. I had joined this kind of indie folk sort of outfit as a lead guitar player briefly. And then around that same time, I joined Cosmo Demonic, and I played with them for about 4 or 5 years. And I kind of learned how to be in a band. And there came a point where, and specifically like in Cosmo Demonic, everyone was really agreeable and easy to be in a band with. If there was ever any disagreement, it had largely to do with something creative, and never, bullshit personal squabbles like you hear of so many young bands engaging in. In a manner of speaking, the ultimate goal for me was to always have a full band. Like because I honestly, I run out of ideas. I understand ultimately, it begins and ends with me, and that the lion's share of the material will probably be written by me at some point. You're nothing without your partners. It's the same thing with acting. You're only good as your scene partner. You're only as good as your scene partner. And it's like, this EP wouldn't be at all what it is if not for my bandmates. It could have been a weird simulacrum of what of what I had originally intended. But there was a point at which I was like, yeah, I want to hear what everyone has to say when it comes to the arrangement thereof. So, and also one of the key components was, back then I had a really poor command of my DAW at home. I'd never recorded at home. I just had, now since the pandemic, I've been, really, giving myself crash courses in drum programming and recording music at home. But it was all, huddled in Talha's apartment and, in front of his laptop with his setup of synthesizers and his playing direct for the first time and ever, which is not something I would ever have entertained. Now I'm all about it. It's like, it's all kind of a learning experience. And we were able to collaborate remotely as well, which we did over the summer when we did, which we've now realized was an ill-advised cover of Red House Painters' Grace Cathedral Park. But we did that all from our respective apartments. We just trading files, and it ended up working quite well, at least sonically. Not how I'd prefer to work, but if in a pinch, it's possible. Again, not something I'd be able to do if I didn't have other members of the band who were capable and who shared the vision, and who will potentially talk me out of really bad decisions.
We are all reluctant astronauts in the pandemic era.
That is the way to say it.
I just have a few more for you, man. You've been terrific. I love these answers, and this discussion has been fantastic. You mentioned the nautical theme, and I'm going to paraphrase you poorly, where you said that All Is Phantom was a very earthly grounded record, and this is obviously for reasons you discussed nautical. I love this album cover. It is gorgeous, one of the best pieces of art on an album
Thank you.
in 2021. So just talk for a second about this artwork.
So artwork was created by the same person who did the artwork for All Is Phantom. His name is Agam Neiman. He's a friend. Well, he's a friend of all of ours, but he specifically knew our bass player. They used to be a roommate of our bass player. But Agam is the kind of person who will literally sleep at his art studio in order to wake up and put more finishing touches on his canvas. You know, he kind of obsessive in that respect. And all I did was basically say, like, I want to explore some of the same themes that we saw in All Is Phantom. Namely, I wanted to see those same two characters that you see on the cover, but I want them to be at sea, and I want a better emphasis on the color blue. And that's basically all I said. And he came at me with this in one fell swoop. Like there was only, I think, some minor adjustment that had to be made with, you know, increasing the blues ever so slightly post, you know, but no, he just nailed it in one try. And a lot of it had to do with the kind of very loose concept that I employed for All Is Phantom, where it's basically like two people are sort of, their boat has crashed somewhere on this kind of random shore, so to speak. And they're in the sort of otherworldly land that is both kind of verdant, gorgeous, but also dangerous and not without its kind of hazards. And over the course of All Is Phantom, they get separated, and sort of the main character kind of learns what it is to kind of grow, be a proper human being, as it were. A lot of that rooted in the concept of grief and personal experiences that I myself went through, you know, before I ended up recording the EP or the record. But this one, I was like, what if they're at sea? What if they've reunited? Or maybe not. Maybe it's before. Who knows? You know, maybe it's the journey. Maybe it's a prequel. But they're at sea this time, and only this time they're on their way to a safer, warmer place, and they get there. That's what the final song is all about, is seaward, where they finally kind of reach the shore. It's in sight, and they know they're going to get there. It's ultimately I won't say it's a happier record, but the lyrics deal more with storytelling elements and narrative elements than they do with things that I experience directly. Of course, whatever I do will always be personal in some way because it comes from me, you know. But it, you know, I was able to kind of explore storytelling elements and sort of set things up in a more cinematic manner, where the subject was outside of me, and it was largely how I relate to that. There's one song, Ada, Age of 8, is literally I wrote that song in 5 minutes when I was 18 years old. I was with my parents in London. We were taking a tour of Highgate National Cemetery, and there was a pietà where where our guide had described this 8-year-old girl who had passed away, and his father, or her father, had erected this kind of pietà with the concept being that she's being borne away on the arms of an angel. And literally right there, I heard everything in my head at that point, like everything from the time signature to the way the song moves. It was all right there instantly. And I was, you know, that story moved me very much. So I was able to sort of incorporate that. You know, one other song, Bosun's Lament, is about, you know, I kind of wrote this narrative about, you know, a group of doomed oarsmen who are sort of kind of in this kind of Samuel Beckettish sort of hell of constantly having to keep rowing and rowing and rowing in the hope of seeing dry land. But that's kind of their eternity. Yeah, and that was a kind of a new challenge for me, because I only kind of, maybe I did that on 2 or 3 songs on the first record, but the majority of everything else was all based around my own experiences as an earthling. And
I know that
I know that
anything
anything
super cliche
super
would
cliche
be
would be
beneath you, but I'd love to ask. I'd love to hear this new EP performed live in a one piece. I know again that's a little too on the nose for somebody like you, but throwing it out there.
it's something that I've talked about already with my bandmates. Nothing set in stone just yet. Obviously, the whole live thing is something that won't happen in earnest for at least another year. However, the more I think about it, the more I embrace the idea of possibly doing some manner of live stream or some filmed live in studio gig. But if we do it, it would have to be right. Like we'd have to go all out with, I'd need the lighting to be correct. I would need some kind of visual element to it. I would love to perform this entire EP front to back. You know, that's the ultimate goal. We've only performed we've only performed Ada Age of 8 live. That's the only song from this EP that we've ever played live. We kind of worked that into our set about a year and a half ago. Yeah, I would very much like to play this EP live. In the meantime, and like, I'm just going to continue writing new material. You know, I feel like the proper full-length follow-up to All Is Phantom is probably going to be closer than one would think. I have about maybe 15 to 17 different songs in various stages of incompletion. I try to be productive with my time, right? Easier said than done.
All right. Well, I like productivity and creativity and all the activities and
All the activities.
all activities and the activities and
You had premiered the Roof and Wall storyboard. Just to close it off, I want to talk a bit about our director, about Ryan Lotz, who did our music video. Brian did do the storyboard animatic for Roof and Wall, and his story is kind of outlined there in that article where he, his house burned down, and just terrible time for him. But he pulled it out for this video. He did everything 100% himself, and he, like, I when I saw the finished product, I couldn't believe what I was watching. Like, like all he did was tell us, okay, I'm going to need each of you to mime the song to a neutral background and just send me individual phone videos, not thinking that it would look anything like this. Like, unbelievable. I would very much like Ryan Lotz to get work for other bands. It wasn't hard for us. We just all we did was mime the song, and then he did the rest. It was, I'm just beyond proud of this music video. I feel like it's, if I like, even if no one sees it, it's still something I can watch and be just like, this is a milestone for this band. We were able to somehow do a music video where we're all seen in the video under a pandemic without having to break any social distance protocols.
Alec Man of Ghostbound, it has been a pleasure getting to hang out with you and hear your story and share your process. Not everybody can easily articulate these things, so I'm so glad that it's comfortable for you, and I really appreciate your take on things and your time.
Well, no, I really appreciate you having me. It's been kind of a long time coming, as it were. You and I